You all agreed to this.
We never foresaw these consequences, Sharon. You signed us into ruin.
You ever come home and find strangers drinking champagne on land your grandfather left you? Because that's exactly what happened to me. The rain had followed me all the way down Highway 93 from Montana, cold spring rain slapping against the windshield of my old Ford F-250 while fog rolled low over Blackwater Lake like smoke crawling across the water. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter as I turned onto Mercer Ridge Road, tires crunching over the wet gravel driveway that had belonged to my family since 1954. The lake wind carried that familiar smell of wet cedar and muddy shoreline through the cracked window, and for about 10 seconds, I actually felt relief. 14 months gone. 14 months sleeping in hospital chairs while my father slowly died 3 states away. I thought I was finally coming home. Then I saw the gates. Tall black iron gates where my dirt access road used to be. Stone walls. Security cameras. Fresh landscaping. And behind them sat 3 massive luxury mansions overlooking the lake like they'd been there for years. My truck rolled to a stop beside a line of contractor pickups parked near the shoreline docks, and I just stared through the rain. Workers were hanging string lights for some kind of open house event. Expensive SUVs lined the new circular driveway. I could actually hear people laughing over soft jazz music drifting through the fog. One of the houses had a heated infinity pool steaming into the cold morning air. Built on my land. Sir, you can't park there. I looked over and saw a security guard walking toward my truck with his hand resting on his belt like he was approaching a criminal. Mid-30s. Clean uniform. HOA logo stitched on the chest. I stepped out slowly, boots sinking into wet gravel. This is Mercer property, I told him calmly. I own this land. The guy gave me the kind of smile people use when they think you're confused or unstable. I'm going to need you to leave before we have a problem. That's when I saw her. Linda Whitmore stepped onto the balcony of the largest mansion wearing a white blazer and holding a wine glass like she was hosting a political fundraiser. Blonde hair perfectly set despite the wind off the lake. Controlled smile. Country club posture. She looked down at me the way people look at stains on expensive carpet. Grant Mercer, she said loudly enough for the guests nearby to hear. Well, this is awkward. A few people turned. Realtors. Wealthy couples. Somebody actually raised their phone and started recording. I could feel every eye on me while rain tapped against the metal roof over the security gate. Linda descended the stone staircase slowly, never losing that polished smile. You disappeared, she said. The community had to move forward. I looked past her toward the mansion sitting on my shoreline. My grandfather's fishing dock was gone. The cedar workshop my father built when I was 12 had been demolished. You built houses on my property. Linda took a slow sip of wine. According to county development records, she said softly, this land was legally reclaimed through abandonment procedures. Even the security guard shifted awkwardly hearing that. Because deep down, he knew how insane it sounded. I stepped closer. Calm. Controlled. You forged this. Her smile tightened for half a second. Tiny crack. Then it vanished. Careful, she said quietly. Causing a scene at a private event won't help your situation. Behind her, one of the realtors laughed nervously and whispered something to a couple touring the property. I caught 3 words through the rain. Disgruntled former owner. That hit harder than I expected. If you're watching this from somewhere with HOAs creeping into every corner of America, comment below and tell me your city, because what happened next only got worse. Linda turned slightly toward the guests and raised her voice just enough to humiliate me publicly. Security, she said pleasantly. Please escort Mr. Mercer off the premises. Then she looked directly into my eyes and delivered the line that told me this whole thing had been planned long before I came home. You should have stayed gone. The security guard never actually touched me. That was the part that bothered me later. He did not have to. The humiliation worked better when everyone acted polite. I got back into my truck while rain rolled across the lake in long gray sheets, and the guests standing near the mansion windows watched me like some drifter getting removed from private property. Linda stayed under the stone entryway with that same controlled smile on her face, wine glass resting lightly against her jacket sleeve while thunder rumbled somewhere beyond the ridge. She looked comfortable, like she had rehearsed this moment. I backed the truck down the gravel driveway slowly, tires cutting through muddy runoff, and I caught sight of something that nearly made me pull over. My father's old fishing dock pilings were still there beneath the new boathouse foundation. They had built directly over them. I drove 3 miles into town through fog thick enough to swallow the road signs, then parked outside Marley's Diner near the county marina. Same place my father used to bring me before sunrise fishing trips. The metal roof rattled under the rain while old country music played low through ceiling speakers. Half the diner went quiet when I walked in covered in mud and lake water. People recognized me. Some looked away immediately. Others stared too long. That told me Linda had already been talking. I slid into a booth near the window and wrapped both hands around a burnt coffee mug while water dripped from my jacket onto the floor. The waitress, Sandra, approached slowly with a coffee thermos tucked against her hip. "Grant," she said carefully, "I heard you were back." Apparently everyone else did too. She glanced toward 2 older men sitting near the counter. They stopped talking the second I looked over. Sandra lowered her voice. "Linda told people the county reclaimed your property last winter. The county cannot reclaim private lakefront land because somebody leaves town for a year." Sandra hesitated. That is not exactly how she tells it. There it was again. That feeling. Not confusion. Coordination. Somebody had spent months shaping the story before I even came home. Outside the diner window, pickup trucks rolled past slowly through the rain toward the new development entrance by the lake. Expensive contractors. Realtors. Delivery crews. Business was moving forward without me. Sandra refilled my coffee quietly. "People thought maybe you sold. Did I sign something?" "No." Then they knew better. Her expression changed at that. Tiny shift. Like part of her agreed with me, but did not want to say it out loud. A man in a flannel jacket finally walked over from the counter carrying his plate of eggs and bacon. Roy Bennett. Local electrician. Worked half the county shoreline properties. "You should have checked your mail," he muttered, before accusing people of things. I looked up at him calmly. "What mail?" Roy stopped for half a second, long enough for me to notice. Then he shrugged. "Certified notices. HOA hearings. Legal postings. Sent where?" He did not answer immediately, just stared out at the rain streaking down the windows. "People around here moved on, Grant." That sentence sat in the booth with me long after he walked away. Not because it hurt, because it sounded practiced. Like something Linda had already been repeating around town for months. I finished my coffee and drove straight to my father's old mailbox property near the county road. The red metal box hung crooked beside the ditch under dripping cedar branches. Empty, rusted nearly shut. But tucked behind it, soaked halfway through from rainwater, sat a stack of certified mail slips bundled together with a rubber band. Every single one stamped undeliverable. Every single one addressed to a rental cabin in Denver I had not lived in for almost 8 years. And at the bottom of the stack was a yellow hearing notice dated 11 months earlier with Linda Whitmore's signature printed neatly across the authorization line. I barely slept that night. Rain hammered the metal roof of my father's old bait storage shed while I sat inside wrapped in 2 jackets beside a propane heater that smelled faintly like burned dust and wet cedar. It was the only structure left untouched near the shoreline because the ground flooded every spring. Linda probably figured it was worthless. Around 3 in the morning, I spread the soaked hearing notices across an old tackle table under a lantern and started reading carefully while fog drifted across Blackwater Lake outside the cracked windows. The notices claimed I had ignored multiple public hearings regarding abandoned property redevelopment. Every document carried the same mailing address in Denver. Every timeline escalated faster than the last. But one thing kept bothering me. The dates. They were too clean, too organized. Somebody had moved with urgency. By sunrise, cold air rolled off the lake hard enough to shake the dock chains outside, and I drove into county headquarters with mud still caked along the sides of my truck. The courthouse sat above Main Street like every small-town building that survives mostly on habit and property taxes. Gray stone, leaking gutters, flags snapping violently in the wind before another storm front moved in over the mountains. Inside, the atmosphere changed the second people recognized me. Conversations stopped. A woman near the tax office looked down immediately at her paperwork. 2 contractors wearing Whitmore Ridge badges walked past pretending not to notice me. That told me Linda had already turned this into a public narrative. Not a property dispute. A social verdict. I waited nearly 40 minutes outside Records Administration while thunder rolled over the courthouse roof and fluorescent lights flickered overhead. When the clerk finally called my name, her voice sounded nervous. Mr. Mercer. She slid a folder across the counter carefully without fully making eye contact. These are the filings connected to Parcel 74. I opened the file slowly. Development permits, environmental approvals, infrastructure easements. Somebody had pushed the project through county review in less than 6 months. That alone was insane for protected lakefront land. Then I saw the signature approving emergency redevelopment authorization. Linda Whitmore, not county government. HOA authority request. I looked up calmly. How does a homeowners association get emergency redevelopment authority over private inherited land? The clerk swallowed hard. The county believed the property had been legally abandoned. Based on what? Silence. She glanced toward the back offices. Fear. Real fear. Finally, she leaned closer. Mr. Mercer, you need an attorney. Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut across the hallway behind me. Well, this is becoming quite the spectacle. Linda Whitmore stood near the assessor's office holding a leather folder against her chest like she belonged there. Perfect hair. Perfect smile. Not one drop of rain on her coat despite the storm outside. She had not come by accident. She had been waiting for me. 2 county employees nearby instantly became very interested in their computers. Linda approached slowly. You could have called me before causing all this tension in town. You built on my property. The community invested millions into restoring neglected land. Her tone stayed polished, but there was irritation underneath it now. Tiny cracks widening beneath the surface. You disappeared for over a year, Grant. People adapted. By forging legal notices? Her expression barely changed. Be careful with accusations you cannot prove. Then she lowered her voice just enough so only I could hear the next part. You are making yourself look unstable in front of people who were willing to sympathize with you. That was the moment I finally understood what she had really built. Not just mansions. Influence. Fear. Public alignment. The room itself bent around her. But right before Linda turned away, a maintenance worker pushing a mop bucket paused beside me for half a second and quietly muttered without looking up, "Check the permit timestamps." Then he kept walking like nothing happened. I looked back down at the folder in my hands while thunder rattled the courthouse windows, and suddenly my exhaustion gave way to something colder. Strategy. By late afternoon, the storm finally broke, but the town still felt heavy under the leftover fog hanging over Blackwater Lake. I parked beside the public marina and sat in my truck with the heater running, rereading the permit timestamps while rainwater dripped from the brim of my cap onto the steering wheel. The maintenance worker had been right. Every approval connected to Whitmore Ridge had moved through the county system unusually fast, sometimes within hours of submission. Environmental review, shoreline impact clearance, utility access authorization. None of that happened overnight in a lake county where people fought for months over dock permits and septic lines. Somebody had cleared the runway for Linda long before construction crews arrived. My phone buzzed against the center console. Unknown number. I answered cautiously. Grant Mercer? The voice was male. Older. Nervous. You do not know me, but you should stop asking questions inside the courthouse. I stayed quiet. The man continued. People around here depend on that development now. Who is this? Somebody trying to help you avoid making things worse. Then the line disconnected. I sat there listening to the low hum of the marina generators through the fog, while something settled in my chest that I had been resisting since coming home. This was bigger than one manipulative HOA president. Linda had built allies, contractors, county staff, realtors, maybe even local officials. And every day those mansions stayed standing. More people became financially tied to protecting her version of the story. A few minutes later, I drove back toward the shoreline access road and stopped near the old bait shop overlooking the water. 2 construction workers stood outside smoking beside a pickup truck with Whitmore Ridge Development decals across the side doors. The second they recognized me, conversation stopped cold. One of them tossed his cigarette into the mud and walked away immediately. The other stayed put, older guy, maybe late 50s, weathered face, reflective vest half unzipped. He watched me carefully through the lake mist. You work this property? I asked. He hesitated before nodding once. Site grading. Did Linda ever show proof she owned the land? He let out a dry laugh under his breath. Lady walked around with county people every other week. Nobody questioned anything after that. That is not what I asked. The man looked back toward the development entrance nervously. Look, all I know is construction started before final approval paperwork cleared. That hit me immediately. How far before? He rubbed the back of his neck. About 6 weeks. 6 weeks. My eyes shifted toward the mansions rising over the shoreline through the fog. That meant Linda had started excavation before legal authorization finalized, meaning she had gambled millions assuming approval was guaranteed. Confidence like that did not come from optimism. It came from protection. The worker lowered his voice. You did not hear this from me, but she kept saying the same thing at contractor meetings. What thing? By the time Mercer comes back, the county will already be committed. A cold gust rolled off the lake hard enough to shake the loose metal siding on the bait shop roof. For the first time since returning home, my anger stopped feeling emotional. It became focused, strategic. Linda had not simply taken advantage of my absence. She had rushed the entire project forward before anyone could challenge it. Before I could challenge it. As I turned back toward my truck, headlights swept across the gravel lot behind me. A black luxury SUV slowed near the shoreline fence. Linda sat in the back seat behind tinted glass, watching. Even from 30 yards away, I could feel that controlled pressure she carried around like perfume. The passenger window lowered halfway. You are upsetting people, Grant, she called calmly through the evening fog. Families live there now. Families moved into stolen property. Her expression tightened slightly. Tiny crack again. Be careful, she said softly. The longer you drag this out, the more this town is going to blame you for what happens next. Then the SUV rolled away slowly through the mist while thunder echoed somewhere across the lake. And standing there alone beside the muddy shoreline, I realized Linda was no longer trying to intimidate me into leaving. She was trying to make me afraid of winning. The rain finally stopped sometime after midnight, but the fog stayed thick over Blackwater Lake the next morning, pressing low against the shoreline like the whole town was trying not to look directly at what had happened. I drove into Pine Ridge before sunrise and parked outside a small law office wedged between an insurance agency and a hardware store on Main Street. One dim light glowed behind frosted glass that read Daniel Reeves, attorney at law. I sat in the truck for nearly 5 minutes staring at it while steam rose from my coffee thermos. Hiring a lawyer meant this was no longer a misunderstanding. It meant war. Inside, the office smelled like old paper, cedar cleaner, and burnt coffee. Rain tapped softly against the windows while a space heater rattled in the corner. Daniel Reeves looked exactly like a man who had spent 30 years fighting county disputes nobody else wanted. Mid-60s, gray beard, reading glasses hanging low, calm eyes that missed nothing. He listened without interrupting while I laid every document across his desk in careful stacks. The hearing notices, the permit approvals, the development timeline, Linda's signatures, the Denver address. By the time I finished talking, the room had gone completely quiet except for wind pushing against the building outside. Daniel leaned back slowly in his chair. Your family trust still owns parcel 74 outright, he said. No transfer deed was ever recorded. Hearing somebody finally say it out loud shifted something inside me. For 3 days I had felt like the whole county was trying to convince me I was crazy. Daniel removed his glasses. Which means if those homes were built on your land without lawful acquisition, he paused. This situation could become catastrophic for everybody involved. Everybody. Developers, buyers, lenders, the homeowners association, possibly county staff. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the courthouse district while he opened another file cabinet and pulled out a thick property code binder. The dangerous part, he continued carefully, is that Linda Whitmore appears to have accelerated construction before final legal stabilization. I heard the same thing yesterday. Daniel nodded once. Because she assumed nobody would challenge ownership after occupancy began. That word hit me immediately. Occupancy. Real families already live there now. Children. Retirees. People unpacking furniture inside houses built over my father's shoreline. For the first time since coming home, exhaustion cracked through my anger. I do not want innocent people destroyed over this. Daniel studied me quietly for a second. That is probably the only reason this situation has not become uglier already. He slid one document across the desk. But make no mistake, Grant. Linda weaponized that exact instinct against you. Before I could answer, voices drifted in from outside the office. 2 women passing on the sidewalk slowed near the window. That is him, one whispered. Linda said he is trying to take the homes back. The other woman sounded nervous. My sister almost bought one of those lake properties. Their footsteps faded down the block, but the damage lingered in the silence afterward. Public perception was already moving faster than the truth. Daniel closed the file carefully. You need to understand something else. His tone changed slightly. More serious now. This development was financed through regional lenders. If ownership becomes legally disputed, banks may freeze transactions immediately. Meaning panic. At that exact moment, my phone buzzed again with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. A woman's voice spoke quickly, almost trembling. Mr. Mercer? My husband and I closed on Lot 3 last month. Linda Whitmore told us the property was fully protected. I closed my eyes briefly. Here it comes. Who gave you this number? Somebody at county records. Her voice dropped lower. Please tell me our house is not sitting on stolen land. Outside, cold lake wind rattled the office windows while Daniel watched my expression carefully from across the desk. And for the first time since this nightmare started, the pressure inside Whitmore Ridge was no longer building quietly beneath the surface. It was beginning to spread. The next 48 hours changed the entire atmosphere around Whitmore Ridge. Not publicly at first. Publicly, Linda kept smiling. The development social media page still posted sunset photos over Blackwater Lake with captions about luxury mountain living and community values. Realtors still walked wealthy couples through those shoreline mansions carrying leather folders and bottled water, while contractors finished stonework along the private marina path. But underneath all of it, pressure had started moving through the project like cracks under ice. Quiet. Spreading. Daniel and I stopped reacting emotionally and started building leverage. Real leverage. By Thursday morning, we had assembled a full ownership chain on Parcel 74 going back 3 generations. Every deed, every trust transfer, every tax payment. No gap, no abandonment filing, no lawful seizure. Nothing supporting what Linda claimed publicly. More importantly, Daniel uncovered something else buried inside the development financing records. Whitmore Ridge had used projected shoreline access rights as collateral when securing construction loans. That changed everything. If those rights collapse, Daniel said while rain streaked across his office windows, their financing structure destabilizes immediately. I leaned back slowly in the chair, exhaustion settling behind my eyes. Meaning the banks panic before the homeowners do. Daniel nodded once. Exactly. Outside, cold wind pushed through downtown Pine Ridge hard enough to rattle storefront signs along Main Street. We spent the afternoon sending formal notice packages to 3 separate entities: the regional lender, the title insurance carrier, and the county risk management office. No threats, no emotional language, just documentation, ownership records, timeline discrepancies, permit irregularities, liability exposure, facts, calm facts. That was the moment the power started shifting. Around 5 that evening, I stopped at Marley's Diner for coffee, and the room felt different the second I walked in. Not friendly, not hostile either. Uneasy. People stopped talking again, but this time it was not because they thought I was unstable. It was because they were nervous. A couple sitting near the window quietly folded up a Whitmore Ridge property brochure the second they saw me. 2 contractors at the counter avoided eye contact completely. Sandra poured coffee into my mug without asking and leaned closer. 3 closings got postponed today. I looked up at her carefully. Who told you that? Mortgage office. Her voice dropped lower. People are hearing things. That sentence traveled through the diner heavier than thunder. Hearing things. Rumors had started moving faster than Linda could contain them. Halfway through my coffee, the diner door opened, and Linda Whitmore walked in wearing a camel-colored coat, still damp from the rain outside. Conversation died instantly. Even the sound of silverware against plates seemed to stop. Linda scanned the room once before spotting me in the booth. Her smile appeared immediately, polished and controlled, but the energy behind it had changed. Too tight now. Too rehearsed. She approached slowly while every eye in the diner followed her. Grant, she said warmly, like we were old friends. You have certainly been busy. Cleaning up confusion tends to take time. Tiny flicker in her expression. Irritation. You are frightening people with legal speculation. I sent documents. The documents frightened them. Sandra quietly stepped away from the booth. Smart woman. Linda lowered her voice slightly. Do you understand what happens if financing freezes? Do you? That landed. Her jaw tightened almost invisibly before she recovered again. Families could lose everything. Families were sold homes on land you never owned. The silence after that felt enormous. Rain hit the diner windows harder, while several customers pretended not to listen. Linda rested both hands lightly against the table edge and leaned closer. You still have time to resolve this privately. There it was. Not a threat this time. Fear disguised as negotiation. My fear was finally becoming hers. I met her eyes calmly. You should have thought about private resolution before you poured foundations into my shoreline. For the first time since I returned home, Linda did not answer immediately. She just stared at me while thunder rolled low across the lake outside. And somewhere underneath all that polished control, I could finally see it happening. The beginning of panic. The following Monday, Whitmore Ridge held its monthly Homeowners Association meeting inside the lakeside clubhouse overlooking the marina. 3 weeks earlier, Linda probably imagined evenings there would smell like wine and cedar fireplaces while wealthy retirees discussed kayak storage and landscaping upgrades. Instead, the entire parking lot was jammed with nervous homeowners standing under umbrellas in cold lake wind, while local reporters lingered near the entrance pretending not to take notes. I parked beside the shoreline fence and sat in silence for a moment watching fog drift across the water behind the mansions. Lights glowed warmly through those giant windows now, but the atmosphere around the development had changed completely. Nobody looked proud anymore. They looked trapped. The second I walked toward the clubhouse, conversations lowered around me. Residents glanced away. A few whispered openly. One older man shook his head at me like this was somehow my fault. But others looked at Linda instead, and that shift mattered more than anything legal paperwork could accomplish. Inside, tension sat heavy in the room like incoming weather. Folding chairs scraped across hardwood floors while rain started tapping softly against the clubhouse windows again. Linda stood near the front podium wearing a navy blazer with perfectly styled hair, but the performance was cracking now. She kept smoothing papers that did not need smoothing, kept checking her phone between forced smiles. Every few seconds, another homeowner approached, asking quiet questions she clearly did not want to answer publicly. Why are closings frozen? Why did our bank request additional title verification? What exactly is happening with the land ownership? Linda responded the same way every time. Calm voice, polished smile. There is misinformation circulating. This is a temporary legal misunderstanding. Our attorneys are handling it. But nobody looked reassured anymore. Daniel arrived 10 minutes after me, carrying a slim leather folder under one arm. The room changed immediately when people realized I had brought legal representation. Several residents stopped whispering altogether. One woman near the back quietly stood up and moved away from Linda's table. Social gravity was shifting in real time. Linda noticed it too. You could see the irritation creeping beneath her expression now. The meeting finally started, and Linda launched into prepared talking points about community stability and outside interference. She never said my name directly. That was intentional. Public distancing strategy. But halfway through her speech, a man in a gray rain jacket interrupted from the second row. Did you know the Mercer family still legally owned the shoreline? Silence swallowed the room instantly. Linda smiled tightly. Ownership claims are currently under review. That is not what I asked. Another homeowner stood up near the marina windows. My lender suspended our refinancing yesterday. A third voice joined in from the back. Our title insurance company called this morning. Linda's composure started slipping visibly now. Tiny cracks widening faster. Everyone needs to remain calm, she said sharply. Panic only damages property values further. That word further hung in the room like smoke. Further, meaning damage already existed. People caught it immediately. You could actually feel the emotional shift moving chair to chair around the clubhouse. Linda realized it 1 second too late. Daniel calmly opened his folder beside me and slid several documents across the front table without raising his voice. Recorded ownership chain. Development timeline discrepancies. Preliminary lender notification filings. No drama. Just evidence. Real evidence. The room went dead silent except for rain tapping against the windows and wind rattling the marina flagpole outside. Linda stared at the papers without touching them. Her face lost color slowly. Then came the moment that truly broke her authority. One of the homeowners near the front looked directly at Linda and asked quietly, Did you build these homes before the approvals were finalized? Linda opened her mouth, but nothing came out immediately. Not confidence, not control, nothing. And in that silence, with 30 residents staring at her while thunder rolled low across Blackwater Lake outside, the entire illusion she built around herself finally started collapsing in public. The meeting never officially ended. It just collapsed under the weight of silence and panic. Homeowners gathered in tight circles near the clubhouse windows while rain hammered the marina outside and fog rolled across Blackwater Lake, so thick the shoreline lights looked blurred and distant. Nobody was listening to Linda anymore. That was the real shift. 3 weeks earlier, people stopped conversations when she entered a room because she controlled the room. Now they stopped because they were afraid of what she might say next. Daniel quietly packed his documents while residents approached us one by one, asking cautious questions in low voices. Are our titles invalid? Can the county shut this place down? What happens if the bank calls the loans? I answered carefully, calmly. No grandstanding. Nobody wants families hurt here, I told them. But the legal ownership issue has to be resolved honestly. That mattered. You could feel the emotional temperature changing around me with every measured response. Linda saw it too. She stood near the podium, gripping the edges hard enough for her knuckles to pale, while several board members avoided looking directly at her. Then the clubhouse doors opened again. Cold wind swept rainwater across the entry floor as 2 county investigators stepped inside, wearing dark jackets with county compliance badges clipped near their collars. Behind them came Sheriff Dalton Reeves, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, steady expression. Not aggressive. Worse than aggressive. Official. The entire room went still. Linda immediately straightened her posture. Sheriff, she said smoothly, trying to recover control. This is an internal homeowners association matter. Dalton removed his rain hat slowly. Not anymore. Nobody moved. Rain pounded the roof harder while one of the investigators approached the board table carrying a thick envelope stamped County Review Authority. Linda's composure flickered visibly for the first time. What exactly is this? The investigator spoke plainly. Pending formal review of permitting irregularities, all additional development activity inside Whitmore Ridge is suspended effective immediately. Audible gasps moved through the room. One homeowner cursed under his breath. Another woman sat down hard in her chair like her knees gave out. Linda looked toward the board members for support, but nobody stepped in. Nobody defended her. That silence hit harder than any accusation. Sheriff Reeves turned slightly toward the room. There will also be temporary restrictions placed on shoreline transfer activity until ownership verification concludes. More whispers exploded instantly. Financing freezes, transfer restrictions, development suspension. Everything Daniel predicted was happening publicly now. Linda tried one last time to regain authority. This is procedural overreach driven by misinformation and emotional pressure. Her voice cracked slightly on the word emotional. Tiny break, but everyone heard it. One of the homeowners near the marina windows suddenly stood up. Did you know about the ownership problem before we bought? Linda looked at him without answering. Another resident spoke up immediately after. You told us this project was fully cleared. Then another voice. Our retirement savings are tied up in this. The pressure started closing around her from every direction at once. Socially, legally, emotionally. Linda glanced toward me then, and for the first time since I came home, the confidence was gone completely. All that remained was calculation and fear. I walked toward the windows overlooking the shoreline while thunder rolled low across the lake, and emergency suspension notices were quietly handed across the board table behind me. Out beyond the fog, the mansion still glowed warm against the water like nothing had changed. But inside that clubhouse, everything had. 3 months later, the gates at Whitmore Ridge stood open for the first time since I came home. No security guards. No luxury sales banners. No smiling realtors offering champagne beside the marina. Just cold wind moving through the empty entrance while fog drifted low across Blackwater Lake under a pale gray sunrise. The development looked different now that the illusion was gone. Smaller somehow. Quieter. The county investigation had expanded fast after the suspension orders. Internal emails surfaced. Permit acceleration records disappeared from county servers and then mysteriously reappeared through backup archives. Contractors started cooperating once lenders froze final payments. Board members blamed each other publicly. By the second month, Linda Whitmore officially resigned from the Homeowners Association under what local reporters called ongoing legal complications. Around town, people stopped whispering my name when I walked into diners or gas stations. Instead, they lowered their voices when hers came up. That was the real reversal. Pine Ridge had finally understood the difference between a difficult landowner and a woman who gambled an entire shoreline community on arrogance. The legal outcome came quietly, which somehow made it more satisfying. Daniel negotiated a structured settlement that avoided forcing families from their homes, but the financial consequences crushed the people who orchestrated the project. Whitmore Ridge Development lost its shoreline claims entirely. Insurance carriers filed recovery actions. County compliance fines stacked up weekly. The Homeowners Association dissolved before winter. And because the structures had been built through unlawful authority exposure, the court approved partial liquidation of development-controlled assets tied directly to the project debt. That included the luxury showcase properties Linda once used to sell her vision of elite lakefront living. I attended the auction on a rainy Thursday morning inside the same courthouse where she once walked around like she owned the county. The room smelled like wet wool coats and burnt coffee while thunder rolled over the mountains outside. Investors filled the benches quietly flipping through property packets. Linda arrived 20 minutes late wearing dark sunglasses even though the sky outside looked nearly black with storm clouds. Nobody greeted her. Nobody stood with her. Not one board member. Not one county ally. She sat alone near the back while parcel after parcel sold under court supervision. Every time the auctioneer's hammer came down, another piece of her empire disappeared publicly. The strangest part was how calm I felt watching it happen. No victory speech. No anger left. Just release. Because none of this was ever really about revenge. It was about restoration. After the hearing ended, Sheriff Reeves stepped outside beside me under the courthouse awning while rain hammered the sidewalks below. "Looks like you finally got your land back," he said quietly. I looked out toward the lake road, disappearing into the fog. It was always mine. He nodded once like he understood something deeper than the paperwork ever showed. A week later, I drove back down the gravel shoreline path at sunrise while cold morning air rolled off the water and cedar branches dripped from overnight rain. Workers had already removed the giant Whitmore Ridge sign near the entrance. Only the concrete base remained. My father's old workshop foundation still sat near the shoreline beneath weeds and broken gravel, untouched through all the chaos. I stood there for a long time listening to lake wind push against the dock pilings while fog moved slowly over the water. For the first time in months, the property felt quiet again. Honest again. Eventually, a county utility truck pulled up beside the road, and one of the workers leaned out his window. "You rebuilding the workshop?" he asked. I looked toward the shoreline where my father taught me to fish when I was 10 years old. "Yeah," I said softly. "I think it is time." The truth is, this entire nightmare started because one person believed influence mattered more than ownership and appearance mattered more than integrity. Linda Whitmore thought polished confidence could replace lawful authority. She thought if enough people benefited financially, nobody would question how the project started. And for a while, she was right. That is the dangerous lesson in stories like this. Corruption rarely begins with violence. It begins with silence. With people looking away because things feel profitable, convenient, or socially easier. But eventually reality catches up to everybody. The banks panic. The county distances itself. The neighbors stop protecting you. And when social authority collapses, it collapses fast. In the end, the legal revenge mattered less to me than the emotional restoration. I got my shoreline back. I got my family name back. I got peace back. And maybe that is the lesson for anybody watching this who feels overwhelmed by people abusing power around them. Stay calm. Document everything. Let arrogant people overextend themselves. Because entitlement eventually creates its own downfall. And when it does, the collapse is usually public. If you made it this far, rank the story from 10 to 0. I would love to know what you think. And even now, every once in a while, when fog rolls over Blackwater Lake early in the morning and rain taps softly against the rebuilt workshop roof, I still think about the last thing Linda said to me before she disappeared from Pine Ridge completely. "You should have stayed gone." Funny thing is, if I had, she probably would have gotten away with all of it.